Welcome everybody to the UK Civil Society Alliance's meeting for December, called a little earlier this month ahead of the Christmas period. Today we're going to cover two parts. Our first part, we're going to cover access to justice, and we will hear from the Honourable Dr. Jocelynne Scutt, and then we will hand over to Margaret Owen, OBE. No better people placed to talk about access to justice as barristers and human rights lawyers and lifelong campaigners for women's rights. So pleasure to have them here today to talk to us about the priority theme for CSW70, the 70th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. They will give us a really useful brief on what access to justice means, the key issues that we can consider ahead of CSW70, and so on. So we'll hear from Jocelynne, then Margaret, and then we'll have time for a Q&A. And after that, we will turn to Alison Marshall, who's joining us from Age International. She's going to join about halfway through today because she has other commitments in the first half. She's going to talk to us about the UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons, Age International's campaign, and she'll provide more details on that. And she's going to talk to us about how we can consider older women as we head to CSW70, either in person or from afar. So without taking up too much time from our speakers, I'm going to hand over to Jocelynne, who's going to start us off. Thank you, Jocelynne.
Thanks so much, Natalie, and it's really good to be here. And now I want to talk about access to justice for women, and is it something that's so high in the sky that we will never achieve it? I'd like to look at this from 5 perspectives. Is law reform necessary or isn't it? Law reform, is it respite and therefore positive, or is it regression? What about law reform when it goes wrong? And legal aid, is this sex-based discrimination built to legal aid? And what about finally seeking justice through law? Well, is law reform necessary or not? And I want to give you 2 quick examples. Wasn't. Non-molestation orders or intervention orders were brought in to operate where particularly a woman was being abused by reason of criminal assault at home or other forms of domestic violence. And the theory was she could get a non-molestation or intervention order to stop the man from doing it. Now, one of the problems here is I can guarantee that if a woman is killed, and somebody needs to do a PhD thesis on that, you can absolutely guarantee that in most instances where it's a partner or ex-partner, husband, ex-husband, there will have been an intervention order and/or he will have been released on bail, or either or. One of the problems here is that in order to get a non-molestation order, the woman has to have been subjected to criminal acts for a period. A woman is not going to go to the court immediately the husband or partner treats her in a violent manner. She's going to actually put up with it for a number of times. And when she actually does eventually go to the police, it's because she's really frightened that she's going to be killed. That's why she goes. And then in court, she gets this order, if she gets it, just to tell him to stop doing it. And this is why I have a real problem. If he does breach the order and he's taken to court for breach of the order, it's not about the fact that the woman has been subjected to criminal assault at home or other forms of domestic violence. It's because he has insulted the court. It's a breach of a court order. When all this happened and we said we have to have non-molestation orders, I have to tell you I didn't. What I was saying was the police have to be told to do their job. And so we're now way behind because we've had this non-molestation order process, and what have the police been doing? Have they really been doing their job and arresting those who commit crimes of violence against women? And the answer is not very often. Consent or no consent? Where does the focus lie? Now, this is about rape. And of course, it was important that we did, in the 2003 Act, define what consent was not. If a man's been feeding a woman alcohol in order to get her compliance, then that will be taken into account as potentially interfering with her capacity to consent. And that was really important to do that. Or say when she's asleep, etc., or if he's defrauded her in some way, specific way. However, we need to get beyond this issue because the focus on consent is actually driving the attention of the whole legal process into what's going on in the woman's head. When what we really need to be asking is, what did this man do? Not what's in her head, what's happening with him. And I think, as I said, the definition of consent was vital. But we need to recognise that rape is about the man. It's not actually about the woman. Now, law reform, respite or regression. There are some instances where so-called law reforms have been made and they're actually not really all that positive. Covering up names, the Jane Doe effect. You'll find that there's an argument that if it's a rape case, etc., we're not going to reveal what the woman's name is. Now, this happened to Chanel Miller, who was raped in the United States at Stanford University, and it was behind a dumpster after a frat party. And the only reason she was actually saved, she was raped, but it could have been, well, there could have been more done to her than that, was because two male Swede students were cycling by and they saw what was happening and they chased the man and he was caught. Brooks is him. He got 6 months. And what she's saying in this book is know my name. She was called Jane Doe throughout. And there was speculation as to who it was it this one, was it that one, etc. And when it was all over, when being sentenced, she made a victim impact statement, which went viral. It went all around the world because it was so powerful. And she writes in this book, Know My Name, I want to be known. I want people to know it was me. This was not my fault. I am not shamed. I am not shameful. He is the one who must be named and who must be regarded as the person who did this violent and abusive and psychologically and physically invasive act. My name must be known. And in Australia, there have been reforms that have said if the woman wants her name known, then she can make the name known and it can be published. And this is because women have been saying, I want it to be known it was me. I'm standing up and I want my courage really to be recognised. Covering up witnesses, out of sight, out of mind. In these cases, we've been told, well, now women will be protected because we'll have a cover in front of them and they don't have to see the offender, etc. I've talked to women who've been in this situation where they've been victims and survivors of rape and other sexual abuse. And a number of them say, I want to confront that man. I want him to see the impact on me, and I want to be speaking in a circumstance where he knows what he's done and the court knows what he's done, and I'm sitting there. Now, of course, there may be others who say, I don't want to be, I do want to be covered up, but I think we need to actually think through what that means. Remote witnesses, there's a process where a witness can be in a separate box being videotaped and the video comes into the court. That book, Witness by Louise Milligan, talks about this, amongst other matters. And she talks about the fact that a man, he'd been sexually abused by George Pell when he was a child, a man who ended up being an archbishop. And he said that it was the most alienating experience of his life to be in this separate space with a camera in front of him, speaking into the camera, and that he didn't like it. He did not like being alone, no wonder. And you know what the solution is going to be to this? They're going to have friendly dogs there in with this person when they're giving the evidence. I say no, I say that we have to rethink what we're doing here. Is this really helpful to those who've been sexually abused? Closing up courts and closing down justice. Often women will be persuaded and women's groups will lobby for closed courts. I say no. You see, if the court is closed, it's not going to be empty. The woman will be there, 12 members of the jury, the judge's associate, 14 people already. There'll be 2 barristers on either side, prosecution counsel and defence counsel. That's another 4. So that's 18. Then there'll be a courtroom attendant with the jury, 19. There'll be somebody who's doing the recording, 20, and that person will change over time. So there won't be then another person present, but it will be a person who's changing. And then who else will we have? Well, anyway, we're up to 20 something or other already. So you're not giving your evidence in an empty courtroom. And who won't be there? The Rape Crisis Centre won't be there. The support people for women won't be there. The people we want won't be there. And most particularly, the media won't be there. Now, you might say, oh, that's good. We don't want the media there. Yes, we do. Because the media, in the end, the friend of those who are in the lower category, whose rights are not properly respected. How do we know that sometimes defence counsel say, oh, she was wearing a red thong, this is a piece of underwear. We know that because the media actually reported it. This was in Ireland. And one of the members of the Irish Parliament held up a red thong and made a speech about this and said, what's happening in our courtroom is wrong. Because a red thong, any piece of underwear or no underwear, has nothing at all to do with whether a woman is raped or not. So we need to rethink this issue. And also beware the lure of privacy. You see, all this is being done in the name of, oh, women have a right to privacy. But it's actually taking away the credibility from women. It's making women even more disbelieved because we have to close ourselves down. It's making us into those who are ashamed and should be ashamed, and that is wrong. This is where law reform's gone wrong. Provocation was done away with in the 2009 Coroners and Justice Act, and it was replaced by loss of control. And specifically in that act was a provision that says if a man, because it usually is a man, if the accused person is claiming that they lost control because the woman was having an affair with somebody or said that she'd had sex with every man in the street. Now, remember, she's dead, and this is probably made up, but anyway, this is what was being said. And when that law went through, in the second reading speech, and everyone who stood up in the second reading debate was emphasising that this notion of infidelity, adultery and so forth should be swept away and shouldn't be allowed to be used by men when they kill their wives or ex-wives. What happened? In Clinton's case, there were 3 points that were raised in favour of loss of control because the man was saying, oh, I lost control, therefore it shouldn't be murder, it should be manslaughter. 1, he'd been looking up on the internet how to commit suicide, and he said that she laughed at him and said he didn't have the balls to do it. Number 2, he said that she said to him that he would have to take care of the children. She was sick of it. And number 3, he argued that she'd been engaging in an affair with another man. Now, when it went on trial, the judge said, you can't put that in about the affair with the other man. Section 55, subsection 6, C, paragraph C of the Coroners and Justices Act 2009. So he was convicted of murder because this allegation that she'd been having an affair didn't go to the jury. When the wife was strangled, she was beaten, she was killed. The appeal overturned the conviction. 3 judges had. And what they said was, oh, yes, we see that in the Coroners and Justices Act. Infidelity is supposed to be cut out. But they said, but Infidelity in this case created the context in which the killing occurred, and it was exacerbated by the laughter about him trying to commit suicide and him having to take care of the children. So they overturned this law reform, and that's because their brains are back in provocation. Because in 2009, when this act went through, there'd be nobody sitting on the bench, I'd almost guarantee, that was at law school in 2009 when this act went through. Therefore, they've never been educated in it. And so their brains, as I say, are back in the dark ages. They're back with provocation, and they have recreated it. What's more, they actually put in, I think it's 3 quotations that came from the second reading speech. And with respect to them, they have been extremely, how can I put it, short in the way that they've put in these quotations, because they're not actually accurate in terms of what the second reading speeches say. Second quick one, corroboration warning by discretion. In rape cases, it used to be the case that you had to mandatorily, as a judge, warn a jury when it was a rape case. Members of the jury, you must be careful, because basically, so I'm paraphrasing it here, women tell lies and make false accusations. This came from Chief Justice Hale way back in 1636, but it was still being quoted. And when we made changes to rape law, the only change we could get in, that it was to the discretion of the judge, that the judge make that warning or not. And in a trial, this Longman, the trial judge said, I'm not putting the warning, it's not necessary. It was a historic child sexual abuse. When it went on appeal, the Court of Appeal in that jurisdiction agreed with the trial judge. When it went to the High Court, the High Court reiterated all this from Chief Justice Hale, women make false complaints, and they revived it and said that in historic child sexual abuse cases, the corroboration warning must be given. Point 4, legal aid. Is it based on sex-based discrimination? And it is, because most of the legal aid goes to criminal law. Who is mostly engaged in criminal law matters? It's not us. It's not women. The numbers of women who go to prison are extremely low compared with the number of men, and women go to prison for crimes that men would never go to prison for. Where are the women? They're in family law, and that's underpaid in terms of legal aid. So we need to look at legal aid too. However, does the law equal justice? I'm coming to the positive now, and I'm in my winding up mode. There is an issue about procedural fairness. There's an issue about substantive fairness. Fairness is supposed to be inculcated in the legal justice system and in the legal process. The right to be heard, equal time, the right to an unbiased decision maker, equality under the law. If the tribunal is biased, then that can be an appellate point. If there isn't equal time given to both sides, that can be an appeal point. And judges, therefore, do have to be careful in accordance with these rules. So the rules are built, interestingly, so as to give women equality with men. It doesn't always work, we know that, but at least the principle is there and we can seek to rely on it. Focus on scope of the law. Remember, the system can work for us. Remember, however, that all law reforms are not necessary. We need to look at what the law is. Can the law help us the way that it is? Can it really be that if we start talking about law reform, we're being diverted off and our energies are being used in a way when we should actually be focusing on making the law as it is work? Let's carefully distinguish between the two. For the sake of women, our energy does matter. Let's use it in the best way. When law requires reform, what then? Educate the judges, educate the magistrates, educate the bar, educate the legal profession entire. Back in 1977, I was working for the Women's Electoral Lobby, and we did the well draft bill on rape and other sexual offences and put in a provision saying it must be mandatory for judges and all these crew to undergo training when a new act is made. that 2003 Act we have here, the Sexual Offences Act, judges weren't at law school when that came in, just like I said they weren't at law school when the 2009 Act came in. Women, now I can't see what I've got here. Well, the thing is that women's voices do matter. Our voices matter as victims and survivors, and as supporters of victims and survivors. Our voices matter as counsel and solicitors working in the system, and speaking up matters. Our voices do matter. And therefore, I conclude by saying, are we looking towards some vision deep in the future, or are we looking for women in justice and women for justice now? That's the issue about access for justice to women. Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to unshare, stop share. Yeah, good. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jocelynne, for sharing your insights into access to justice and the key issues that we need to bear in mind. So that's given us a lot to think about in terms of what access to justice can mean in the context of women and girls, and also some thoughts on what we can reflect upon ahead of CSW70. And now I'm going to hand over to Margaret Owen, and Margaret's going to talk to us some more on her thoughts and reflect on the things that we need to be keeping in mind ahead of March 2026.
Can you see me okay?
We can, yeah.
Right, I have to be rather quick because I've got to go out quite soon. So this is going to be very short. But what I'm going to say, first of all, let's be clear. We are living in the most unpredictable and critical time, a time when there are more and more authoritarian, male-led regimes all over the world that are both racist and misogynist and are having a terrible impact upon women. So that all the extraordinary achievements that we thought we had obtained over the years, from the CEDAW and the Beijing Platform for Action, and things like 1325, the Security Council resolution. All of these extraordinary achievements are now being threatened terribly, and we have to acknowledge that there's been an appalling pushback on women's rights, on gender equality and women's empowerment. But I just need to ask a question. This meeting that, Natalie, that you've organised today is also in the context of the parallel event that you have got a slot for at the CSW next March. But I'm just wondering how on earth the CSW or any of the other UN entities can actually operate in Trumpland. As you will all have seen today, how he is cutting back on visas, not just from those 41 countries that are on his list, or for Muslim women, but now even in this country, I know I wouldn't get a visa if I was trying to go to the CSW, because they'd look at my Facebook, they look at my emails for the last 5 years, they look at all the things that I've said, which have been extremely critical of Donald Trump and all the terrible things that he is doing now, particularly against women, against migrant women, against refugees. So I'm just wondering, what we can do, the Alliance can do, to get the UK to question the Trump policies on these visas. And as I said at the beginning of this meeting, I think before it really started, isn't Donald Trump breaking that original contract treaty made in 1945 when the UN was set up, located within the United States, that it should be open to delegates from all the member states in the world. So that's another question. When we're talking about access to justice, and then I'm not quite sure when you have your parallel event on the issues, are you only looking at access to justice in this country, or will you be looking at access to justice for women all over the world, some of them having their access to justice limited by the UK's own policies, such as its extraordinary and very regretful cutting of aid? Back to the theme of access to justice. Of course, what is absolutely key to accessing justice is legal aid. That's so important that women have legal aid. And I think that almost, is it over 60% of all people who apply for legal aid are women. Women desperately need legal aid. They need legal advice. And in particularly who are vulnerable are women who are victims of domestic abuse, women in family law matters, whether it's about divorce or custody of children, particularly Black, migrant, refugee, asylum-seeking women need legal aid. They are huge barriers to women accessing justice if they cannot afford lawyers to represent them. And we remember that in the CEDAW and in the Beijing Platform for Action, there are key articles which require member states who signed up to the CEDAW, who are obligated under the Beijing Platform for Action, to ensure that women do have legal aid and that they do have access to legal advice centres. There are such significant barriers to legal aid. There's the shame and the stigma that always is to women when they try to go to court or go to the police about what's happening to them because they're victims of domestic abuse. There's the appalling legal illiteracy because we've done so little in this country to even publicise the existence of the CEDAW and its optional protocol. There's a lack of awareness about what we women do have rights to. And then there's poverty and childcare and all these reasons why it's so difficult for women to access, particularly in the context of access to housing, access to healthcare, access employment rights. We know how difficult it is for women to make complaints. We know that the care system, for example, it's actually dominated by women, and they are paid much less than in male-dominated industries where men get much higher pay. All the time, women are most vulnerable because of their poverty, because of their ethnicity, because of the colour of their skins. And now we are here in this country. I thought it was only the Tories who would be cutting back and violating international law. But here we have a Labour Party that is even considering, well, maybe not withdrawing from the European Charter of Human Rights, but certainly trying to reform it because they're now almost servile to America and to Donald Trump's policies, and maybe even to Nigel Farage, as they're going more and more right-wing, and they're going to cut help to women asylum seekers, where already access to justice means having the support of the CEDAW, but actually in the 14 years since that the WNC was abolished 14 years ago, we don't even have in this country a proper institutional mechanism like we had with the WNC. And our obligations under the CEDAW are international law. So we're breaching that when we are completely indifferent from their recommendations that we had to fill the gap left by the WNC, have an institutional mechanism grounded in statute, where just like when we had the WNC, we could actually make our voices heard on behalf of women's NGOs to the ministers, to cabinet ministers, to the Prime Minister. And I wish the alliance, which I helped to set up in 2010 when the WNC was abolished, I wish that the alliance had done much more to protest against the betrayal of women by both the Tory government and by the Labour government. We're breaching the Refugee Convention. We're breaching the CEDAW. We've failed to look at the impact of austerity and the impact of Brexit on women. Because of Brexit, many, many women's organisations lost funding that they would have had when we were still a member of the EU. So legal advice centres have been cut. It's really, really difficult for women to get the advice they need so that they can go to court. And I pick up on everything that Jocelynne has just told you in the context of domestic abuse and sexual violence. When I look at the Refugee Convention, it's really frightening that even Starmer wants to change or reform the way the courts will interpret the European Charter of Human Rights. And he would want to stop women who are fleeing not just the violence of conflicts and the sexual violence in conflict, but women are fleeing regimes where just because they are women, they're subject to things like FGM. With their widows, they can be forced into being inherited like a chattel by a dead husband's brother, or they're into forced marriage or child marriage. We have a duty to women all over the world to help them access justice. And then we have things like the Resolution 1325, which would, even in our National Action Plan, we need to be sure that women are present in all these peace tables. If we look at the conflicts all over the world today, what are we doing about that? The UK government is actually funding regimes that are committing genocide, which are committing femicide. We know what's happening in Gaza. We know what's happening against the Kurds in Turkey. We know what's happening at the moment in Eastern Congo. All these women who have a right to access to justice and to be protected. But as I go back to it, I think what we really need to have predominant in whatever you are going to do at the CSW is the access to legal aid. If women cannot access legal aid, if they cannot access lawyers and legal advice centres, then they have no access to justice at all. And I'm also concerned about cutting trial by jury. And I'm glad that people like Helena Kennedy in this country is also with us, that actually 800 years trial by jury, having 12 members of the public who will decide on questions of fact, up to the judge to decide on the questions of law. But this is a right that everyone should still have, and it will go disproportionately. Women will be harmed if they don't have also that right. And also when I think about access to justice, what injustices there are in our country, that we have more women in prison than any other country in Europe. And a lot of these women are there, they shouldn't be in prison. Very few of them are there for violent crimes. They're there because of poverty, because they've been victims of domestic abuse. They've been victims all their lives because they're women and because they're poor women. I think I better stop now because I've got to go off somewhere else. But I think in context also of housing and the homelessness that women are feeling because of poverty, we've also got this problem about evictions for no fault. And it's women and children who become homeless. And then once they are homeless and in poverty, they're more likely and vulnerable to be victims of rape and sexual assault and trafficking. So we've got a lot of things that we would need to put on the table for your event in the CSW next March. But I'm just wondering how many of our sisters will ever get there, and shouldn't we be doing something about that? Or should the CSW be somewhere else, like in Nairobi? Because there are going to be so many women whose voices are never heard, who have to be heard, who will not be able to get their visas to America this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Margaret, and thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts with us. Despite the fact that you need to rush off elsewhere, we're so grateful to hear all of your thoughts and reflections on what we need to consider going into CSW70. And you're absolutely right. It was a key issue that everyone was raising in the 69th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, that many women weren't getting visas to allow them to attend in New York City, and yet another year passes by, and at the 70th session we're facing the same thing again, but on a greater scale. And so it is crucial that this is something that we keep in mind in our discussions with the UK government, and that we do encourage challenging various policies. I think I saw in the chat that Arla made a comment about, Margaret, how you were calling for the universality of women's rights, and it is critically important. You mentioned the event that we will have at CSW70, the Alliance event. The event will be on legal literacy and access to justice, and it will be international in scope. So we're not just considering the position in the UK. We're looking to invite a panel of international speakers, because the issue of legal literacy is one that is just an exorbitant issue across the world. And you said, Margaret, I think your words were that we have appalling legal literacy in the UK, just a complete lack of awareness of CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and the optional protocol. But by comparison to many countries across many continents, particularly in the global south, and in various different cultures, legal literacy for women and girls is almost non-existent. And when we say legal literacy, what I mean by that is not just knowing that laws exist, it's the right to know your own rights and responsibilities, and being able to recognise when certain legal issues arise, knowing where you can seek assistance, being able to seek that assistance. So Margaret, you've highlighted the importance of access to legal aid and how to navigate that system and what to do when legal aid doesn't respond, and so on. And it's also about possessing the confidence to be able to engage in those processes, and that confidence comes with the literacy. At the Women's Parliament, which was chaired by Jocelynne, on the 8th of December 2025, I took the opportunity to discuss legal literacy. But I commented that actually legal literacy is itself obstructed by the huge amount of illiteracy that women and girls face across the world. 2/3 of the illiterate adult population is female. And so this is a critical issue. It's one that we'll cover at CSW70. We will make sure that we cover all the key issues that have been raised today insofar as they relate to legal literacy. And Margaret, despite the fact that you won't be there in person, you will nonetheless be there with us in voice, and we will carry your voice there, and we'll make sure that you are heard. So I just want to open up the floor to any quick questions that we might have for Jocelynne, knowing that Margaret, you might need to leave now, so you might not be able to stay for the Q&A. I'm sure we can refer any questions specifically to Margaret to her outside of the meeting. But if anyone has any questions on access to justice in the next 5 minutes, it would be great if you could raise them before we pass over to Alison Marshall, who then will talk to us about the rights of older women. Do we have any questions for Jocelynne or Margaret?
Arlem does.
Oh, sorry, I did not see that. Arlen, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, what I would like to say, thanks both for their contribution. There is a lot of things we can discuss, and we have to be prepared if we are going to go and divide certain issues according to the expertise of each of us. But I think the voice for universality, which Basira carries, and I am so glad, Margaret, that you emphasize it again through your passion and really knowledge. I respect that and I applaud it. We have to present cases based on our equality and universal rights. No more, no less. Wherever we are in any part of the world. I'll give you an example. At least in the West, you're having a system that you have a legal aid or something. One of the Arab countries, if a man goes to apply for a divorce, put an application, which rarely they do, he is not charged any money. A woman, if she goes to get an application for a divorce, they charge her £30. A woman in Jordan, her husband, she didn't have the £30, and she came back, and he got to know that she went to asking for that. He got her eyes out of her face in front of her children. 3 children. How cruel and how horrible is that going to be? So really, we need to sit together and prepare each one of us, support each one, but the universality should be the principal thing which we need to call for. And thank you both, Jocelynne and Margaret. I really respect you a great deal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will pass over to Monica, and then if Jocelynne or Margaret want to comment after Monica's spoken, that would be great. And then we will move on to Alison Marshall.
Thank you enormously, everyone. Margaret, Jocelynne, and Natalie. This has been very productive and an important conversation, but I'm thinking about the importance of the equality of men and women, and so vital it is for humanity to progress. And without this equality, how can we anticipate that there will be more peace, there will be more prosperous regions in the world, families, nations? So in terms of the UK and the conversation that we're having towards CSW70, if we can think of a roadmap for more access to legal aid and to access for justice, what can be this roadmap for us to be doing now towards CSW70? Maybe if we can raise some points here and see what we can do in a tangible way to raise these points with the FCDO.
Can I thank you so much? Lovely to hear you speak, Monica. Really lovely. I mean, yes, let's face it and come out with it. We are living in the most, seems to me, and I'm so old, you see, I remember all the excitement of hope of 1945 when I was 13 years old. It was the end of the Second World War. It was the beginning of the United Nations. It was the beginning of our National Health Service here from the cradle to the grave. We had the 1944 Education Act. We had the CEDAW. All these things, we had so much hope and things were going to get better. And more countries, there were more women in parliaments. And now we're seeing more, the absolute opposite. Now we've got more autocracies and democracies. And all over the world now, we've got conflicts where there are no women at the so-called peace tables. They're not peace tables. They're so-called ceasefire tables where men with guns sit talking to other men with guns, with proxy supporters in other countries. Look what's happening in Gaza today. I mean, look what's happening in Turkey with the Kurds. The women are not there. So, Monica, to reply to you, what we have to do, all we have to do, is to get more and more women in decision-making at every level, not just in parliaments, in local government. And again, I look at the Kurdish model, where every single decision-making body has a co-chair, a man and a woman. I'd like to see the next Secretary General of the UN being replaced not by another man or even another woman, but by co-chairs. Wouldn't it be good if everywhere we had a man and a woman in charge of every decision-making body, whether it's the army, a national parliament, a university, a health, the courts, the police, everywhere? But how do we do this? And what we have to do more and more, is to work much harder to find all those serious men in every country. As Mary Robinson always said, in every country there are serious men who understand that we have to have gender equality and women's empowerment and women in decision making if ever we want to have a just and peaceful society. So that's what we've got to do. We've got to, and here we are in a country like the UK, where I'm still not in prison when I criticise the government. There are countries still where we do have the freedom of speech. We've got to protect our freedom of speech, protect our right to protest democratically. I mean, we've got to do all we can to support our independent judiciaries. We're even on a slippery slope here in this country. But let's work harder than ever before to speak for all the women who cannot speak, to get more women into parliament, more women in local government, more women in decision making, that we can talk for all our sisters who are facing such abuse, such stigma, such discrimination, even in the justice system. And I'm just thinking about one thing I didn't say because I couldn't say it all in the short time I had to speak. But I just wonder about those women who are not in prison, who've been victims of domestic abuse, whose husbands are in prison, but have now been maybe given early release. And what role have women got on the parole boards so that they're protected when these men come out of prison? We know that there have been far too many murders of women by men because these women have tried to speak or tried to go to the police or tried to make a complaint about them. And let's do much more in this country to fill the gap in data. We don't even know how many domestic abusers are being released in this trying to unclog the overcrowded prison system. There's so much more. We've got a few more months before your slot at the UN. Let's all work together to get some of this out. And I think actually filling the gap in data is a very, very important a job that we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret, for addressing Monica's comments, and thank you again, Monica, for your question. One thing I would say, in addition, in preparation for CSW70, the Alliance will be creating an issue paper, but that's imminent. So if anybody has anything that they would like to add to the issue paper on access to justice specifically, please could you email your thoughts to me? I'll put my email address in the chat. Please could you do so over the next few days? Even more helpful would be if you have any wording that you would like me to put in so that I can make sure that views are reflected.
Can I just say now, Natalie, I've got to rush now. I've got to run. I'm sorry if I've been talking rather quickly and wildly, but I'd like very much, if you will have me, I'd love to help contribute to your paper. Thank
Margaret,
you.
it wouldn't be a paper without you, so we will be in touch with you. And thank you very much, Margaret, from all of us for your contribution.
Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye.
We will return to Jocelynne for some final comments at the end. But before we do, let's turn to Alison Marshall in our last half an hour to talk about older women. Specifically, she's going to cover the UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons, opportunities at CSW70, and more. So, Alison, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And sorry I couldn't be with you from the beginning, but it's the team Christmas social, so had to go and play some games. I'm going to share a few slides, I hope, if I can make the share thing work, to take you through two particular points. So, Natalie, can you give me a thumbs up if you're seeing my screen?
I can see the screen, yes.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons, obviously including older women, and the older women's focus area at CSW70. So the rights of older women, that's what we're talking about all the time. And older people across the world often say to us, well, we've got laws about children, and obviously we've got CEDAW, and obviously we've got the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, but there is no convention specifically about the rights of older people. But older people deserve to be treated better, and they deserve laws to recognise their rights, especially as our world is ageing. The global population is set to see 1 in 5 people over 60 by 2050. That's only 25 years from now. And as we all know, ageism and age discrimination is widespread. So the brilliant news is that the Human Rights Council in Geneva made a landmark decision in April this year to set up a working group to start the drafting of a new United Nations Convention, a Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. So it's happening, which is fantastic. And they also renewed the mandate of the independent expert for the full enjoyment of all human rights. So she will, well, not Claudia won't carry on. She'll be at CSW70, and then she'll be handing over to the new person, but she will be with us there. So she's a great ally in terms of speaking about the rights of older women. So why do we really need a new human rights convention? Well, of course, older people have the same rights to life and to health, to social inclusion, to economic empowerment, to inclusion in humanitarian response, and also to social protection, pensions, decent work. So a convention would create much greater legal certainty and universality, those themes that we've just been hearing about from Margaret. It would provide guidance to governments It would establish obligations and responsibilities on duty bearers. It would strengthen accountability. And we hope as well it would reframe attitudes, public attitudes, because we know that ageism is rife, and it can actually also be self-directed ageism. So we want older people to see themselves much more as rights holders in the future. And so we've just launched a campaign that we're calling Nothing About Us Without Us, which of course was the slogan used very successfully by people with disabilities when they were pushing for the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And we're calling on the government to ensure that older people are actively involved in the creation of this new UN Convention. Clearly their expertise, clearly their lived experience must be part of the drafting and of course the implementation. So we need to have older people at the table, older women at the table, older women sharing their experiences so that the convention really will speak to the barriers and challenges that they encounter. So this campaign calls on the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office Minister with Responsibility for Human Rights, Chris Elmore MP, to include older people in the United Nations drafting. And we've got an open letter. So if any of your organisations would like to sign on to the open letter, then please do contact me and we can send you the letter and you can see whether you feel able to sign up. That would be fantastic. And then for individuals and supporters, there's an online campaign action. And again, it's the same theme. It's urging the UK government to ensure that older people are actively involved in the drafting of the new UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. So it would be fantastic if all of you could sign the online action, and we can also put a link in the chat, or you can hopefully see that QR code. And if you are able to send it out more widely, that would be fantastic too. So that was the first thing to tell you about the new United Nations Convention and the push to the UK government to make sure older people are involved in that. The second area that I wanted to speak about is the fact that there will be a special focus area on older women's rights at CSW70. This will be only the second focus area in the history of CSW. There was one before, and it was focused on Indigenous women. So they've picked and agreed a focus area on older women's rights because, as we know, the gendered inequalities that women face through the life course are compounded in older age. And of course, older women make significant contributions, we know, but are invisible. And we also know very well all the barriers that older women face in accessing their rights across the 12 areas of critical concern in the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. So what form will this focus area on older women take? Well, it could have taken a number of different forms, but what they've decided is that there will be a ministerial roundtable during the first week, and we think it's most likely to be on Tuesday, the 10th of March. So we need to push the UK government to make sure that they participate and that there's a high-level representative from the UK government at that ministerial roundtable to really ensure that they are, at the table and leading this debate. But we also are calling on them to ensure that older women activists are also there and that civil society have a voice too. We're also asking the UK government, since there is this focus area at CSW70, to integrate older women's rights and needs into the final outcome text and the agreed conclusions. It's a year when we could see a strengthening of text about older women's rights, and also to thread older women's rights through their CSW interventions and events. So we're suggesting that they might want to think about including older women on various panels that they may be organising. So that's our big push ahead of March, and I hope that you'll join us. And if you want to be in touch, my colleague Ken leads particularly on the convention. My colleague Katie particularly is leading on older women's rights. You know me, I'm here, I'm Alison, and there's also a link to our website where we have the campaign details. So thank you very much, and I'll put again the link in the chat. Happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alison. Does anyone have any questions on what's been covered, the UN Convention and the special focus area of older women at CSW70? I'm opening the floor up for any questions now. In the meantime, I have put in the chat the link to the Nothing About Us Without Us campaign. Jocelynne, you have a question or comment?
I just want to make a comment because thank you so much for working on the issue of ageing and mentioning women in particular, of course, because one of the issues that really interests me is the attack on the baby boomers. Now, it's constant, you know, from young people that baby boomers are being blamed for everything. And yet what we know is that older women are the highest number of those who are not housed. They're homeless. And therefore, what we need to look at are the disparities, again, between women and men. I mean, I know, I can just remember, and I'll end on this note, but I remember being in Melbourne and walking up Collins Street, and this wonderful woman, Deborah Towns, coming towards me, really dancing and saying she just paid off her mortgage. Now, Deborah actually is highly trained. She's a professional. She worked as an equal opportunity commissioner and so forth. And yet, here she is, she's just paid off her mortgage on her house. Now, I know my colleagues at the bar, male, who would not just be paying off the mortgage on their domestic arrangement. They'd have blocks of flats, they'd have this, they'd have that, they'd have heaps of resource. And so I think that when we're talking about ageing, as you have done, Alison, emphasis on the disease in terms of sex-based rights is absolutely fundamental, and it has to be recognised. And I come back to the issue about the pensions and the 1950s women, the lack of actual awareness of the position of women who were born in the 1950s when that act was passed in 1995 is just stunning. And that's the group that are the most disadvantaged now. But thanks so much, Alison. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jocelynne. Does anyone have any other questions for Alison before we free her to go back to playing games at the Christmas party? No further questions. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Alison, for joining us. We'll finish up here. I think Jocelynne's got a few more comments to make on access to justice, but it's been really fantastic to hear from you. So thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good festive season. Take care of yourselves. Keep warm. Bye.
Thank you. Take care, Alison. So, Jocelynne, if I can hand over to you and you would like to wrap up on any final comments on access to justice, that would be fantastic.
Thanks, Natalie. I only really wanted to be brief, but when Margaret was talking about the early release program, it reminded me that what we need to see statistics on in that regard is how many women have been released under the early release program, because what we know is that women are in prison, I think I mentioned, for crimes that no man would be in prison for. And so they shouldn't be in prison in the last, but they really should be being prioritised on this early release scheme. And I can bet you anything they're not, because the point would be that you can release a lot more men and make a lot more difference to the prison statistics. But the point that Margaret made is really crucial too. It really goes to this failure to actually take women's lives seriously. That's what the bail issue is about, that the men on bail who are killing women. And why have they been released on bail in the first place? It's because violence against women is not taken seriously within the legal system, the so-called justice system. And this early release scheme, when we look at who's being released, that's why I think that if only somebody would have the energy to do it, write to the Minister for the Secretary for Justice and ask for explicit statistics on how many men have been released, how many women have been released, what the crimes are that they're in prison for, etc. Because it really does belie belief that there's not a recognition that men who've committed crimes of violence against women should not be being released. And my final point here is the very fact they're in prison on violence against women convictions is a miracle in itself. And so they must have done something absolutely heinous in order to be there in the first place. And yet they're the ones who have been let out. But yeah, ask how many women have been released under the early release schemes and why they're in prison in the first place. We need a review of women in prison. And my final point is we need an absolute review of women in prison too for crimes where they have been prosecuted and convicted of killing a former partner or a partner. There was supposed to be a review done of it when God, I've just forgotten her name, it's gone out of my head, but the one who was released and coercive control was raised in her case. There was supposed to be a review, and I wonder what's happened to that review. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any further comments that they want to make? Annette.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I have to apologise for being so late today. I'm afraid it's a question of using a car and not being able to move for most of that time. But I was able to join before Alison talked. And thank you, Alison, for raising the issue of, thank you, Nawo, for raising the issue of older women. I do think it's really very important. I just didn't have anything to particularly ask because I really like that, Alison, your presentation and everything you were saying, but certainly to offer my support and certainly to sign an open letter about it. I also would like to support Jocelynne with what she just said. Is that not something that the Alliance could actually do? To have our executive and our chairs, if there are, I'm not sure if they're co-chairs these days, but anyway, actually write to the ministers responsible, asking very specific questions about the release of women, especially older women maybe who are in jail. I don't know how often that happens, but given that all our statistics that I've ever seen, women are disadvantaged when they're sent to prison, including recently, as you know, because men who are claiming womanhood have also been imprisoned with them. So that, I think, is something that has been taken up. But we need to hold on to the category woman, which is under attack constantly at the minute, and also say, okay, it's great that in this country and in most of Europe and in the West and so on, we're all living longer lives. So older women actually is really important. And the problem of invisibility, and when you get older, you really notice it, that people in a conversation just don't give you a gap where you can come in unless you almost sound rude by interrupting. And it matters because our opinions, when well, from what age? 50, 60? I mean, I'm going to be 90 next June, and I think I still have an opinion that might be valuable to somebody or other. So that's really all I'm wanting to say to the Alliance today is congratulations. Good that we're looking at the disadvantage that older women experience in all categories, including, of course, in access to justice and in freedom from being imprisoned, as Jocelynne was just raising. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. It is particularly important. And on the note about the letter to the minister, Kat has said in the chat that we can take it forward as an action for a freedom of information request. So perhaps if we can have some collaboration on wording of the letter so that we're addressing all of the key questions that need to be asked, then that would be fantastic.
I'd
And
just like to
Leslie,
add to you that I
oh,
would be
sorry, go
happy.
on.
Sorry, can I just add that I would also be very happy to help in drafting something like that, and certainly at least of reading it and making comments if there is a first draft going around. Thank you.
That would be fantastic. The more the merrier, I think. So thank you very much. Wendy, you had your hand raised next.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, all the speakers have been amazing. I also just wanted to sort of support Jocelynne in the comments that she was making around training. I was for 38 years a magistrate in the criminal courts in this country, and for 36 of those also a family magistrate, and for 10 of them also a youth magistrate. And I can absolutely say that despite the fact of equality training, all the various trainings, it made absolutely very little difference to the men who were really stuck in the 19th century, if not previously, in terms of their understanding of violence against women and girls. That was also true in the family courts. It was true in the criminal courts. It was true in the youth courts. You know, they would mosey. I just can't tell you. My neighbor across the street, who I introduced to the magistracy, whose background is from Nigeria, although she was born in London, it took her 3 or 4 times as long to be considered to be a chair of the court, just a chair, you know, what they call now providing justice, than it did any other man. She had to go over and over and over and over and everything. She's a highly professional woman, but they would not accept her for some unknown reason. She was nearly quitting many times, and I've had to support her in her, you know, in her efforts to continue. And it's just been ridiculous. I went to a very interesting seminar some of you might have done about patriotic. It was put on by the Baha'i International Community, but it's on YouTube as far as I know. It was from various judges, women judges, and a couple of men judges from around the world, talking about the patriarchal position of judges around the world, including in this country, the United States, and many other places, that have really not enabled access to justice for women. And if you have an opportunity to look at that, it was it was also some ambassadors from around the world as well. These are very high-level diplomatic events. I think it's really something we really need to be able to support Jocelynne in her efforts, and all others who are trying to get better training, but also a greater understanding within the judicial system, which really means you have to go to the government to actually make the changes that Jocelynne is describing. I 100% support you, Jocelynne, and thank you for your courage in taking these things on and facing them straight in the face. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I think Jocelynne made a comment in the chat as well, and she made the same comment when she was speaking, that the need for training has to be constant. It can't be a one-off. It needs to be a continuous thing. Many of us in our careers now have to have yearly top-ups on certain training, even if that's online training. It's something that we have to do as a top-up. And it's absolutely crucial in the justice system, throughout the justice system, as you've said, Wendy. It's an issue with magistrates, and it's been supported in the chat as well by Maureen as well. Leslie, I'll hand over to you for your question.
Thank you, Natalie. I apologize for dodging in and out. I had to help out with somebody. Thank you both of the speakers, because I was listening as I dodged in and out, and you were brilliant. And I just want to follow up and say something, adding to what Annette said about ageism, because it's particularly, I've noticed it's a lot on the media. They make jokes about, particularly to their female, if you listen to Times Radio, as I sometimes do, to the female co-presenter, oh, you know, you're a certain age, etc. These women probably are only about 40 something, but they're having to apologize all the time for being older. And relating to employment, there is such an ageism against particularly women in employment if you're over a certain age. and some of us do actually need to earn to survive. And if they can see your age, which unfortunately now gets out on Facebook and Wikipedia and things, you're sunk before you start. So I think we need to also look at the whole thing of ageism in employment. There tends to be at the moment trying to say everything, our generation had it all, so they can take off from the pensions because young people can't get houses and things. It shouldn't be one generation or the other. It should be the rights for everybody. And I think we need to fight back on that a bit. So just backing up for what Annette said, but to go a bit stronger and wider. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I absolutely agree with what you've said. It can't be one generation against the other. And I think that Jocelynne made the point earlier about younger generations and their comments about baby boomers. It's always pitting one against the other. Yeah. And for any of us to be able to move forward, to get any advantages, for any of us, we need to do better at working together. Does anyone have any final comments that they want to make before we close, or any final questions? Jocelynne, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, if I could just say with one, I think it was something that was it Alison or Wendy or somebody who spoke, I think, about the magistracy. But reminded me of a case that I know it was the one who said about the woman who had to go through the hoops in order to get elevated, and it took ages for her. This is the first case on anti-discrimination. It was about 78 in New South Wales, and it was a woman who wanted to be promoted through the TAFE system. It's a technical and further education system. Anyway, she put her name forward, and she didn't get put onto the list for promotion. And when she took her case to the Anti-Discrimination Commission, the problem for her was, you see, that she was arrogant, and she was therefore not suitable to go onto the promotions list. And you know why she was arrogant? Because she put her name forward to go on the promotions list. So it was one of those cases of, tails you win, heads you lose, or something. Because heads you lose, tails I win. Because if she didn't put her name on the list for promotion, she wouldn't get promoted. But if she puts her name on the list for promotion, she's arrogant and self-opinionated, and therefore she doesn't get promoted. And unfortunately, this is still embedded in the system, this idea that if you do say, I'm worthy of please, I'm worthy of a top up to my salary, an increase in my salary, you won't get it because you're asking, and therefore you're self-opinionated and you've got a high opinion of yourself. But if you don't ask, you won't get it. And nobody is telling men who put their name on the promotions list or who say I'm worthy of a rise that they're not going to get it because they're arrogant and they're self-seeking. It's so ironic. Anyway, just for
Thank you, Jocelynne. And that is super important. I think probably all of us at some point have heard at some point in our careers or lives that we need to be more like men to be able to achieve something. It was something I heard in feedback for my first proper job interview. My feedback was that I needed to act more like a man with my confidence. But of course, when you act more like a man in your confidence, exactly as you say, Jocelynne, then it gets taken as arrogance anyway. So it's actually, you're in an impossible situation. Does anyone have any final comment before we close? Sally, you're on mute.
Sally, you need to unmute. Sally.
There, I've done it. I couldn't make the arrow move. I made a note in the chat column. I just wondered, when the government has something really important to tell the whole nation, they are able to run campaigns. For example, in wartime, they tell you to take care or not show your car lights at night or something. And now, if they want to stop pollution and so on, they can involve all the media and information go to all the local government and councils and everything. I have a feeling that although that would be focused probably only on one point or something, but it could be part of an ongoing campaign. Because as far as I can see, we've just simply got to be sure that everybody from child up to old are told the reason why it's so important to care about everybody and listen to everybody, because the natural way that we communicate often isn't fully understood, and people find it difficult to stand up in a meeting and speak up and so on. It does need training, and I think that this means that when you're writing your special letter of what you want, I think this business about education and how you communicate at all these different levels, from individual, local, regional, national, international at CSW and so on, it's got to be coordinated and everybody putting their name to it, not just one letter going out and perhaps 50 people of civil society signing, but it's got to be everywhere, absolutely like traffic light signals. Everybody sees them all the time. So I don't know if you can do anything about it, but I just feel that's what's needed.
I absolutely agree. I think the point is that there's so much more that can be done. I've made a note here of your comments about education too, Sally, because it's so critically important. So I think before we finish, I just want to close with a comment that Jocelynne's made in the chat, and that is how fabulous it is to be a woman. That despite all the things that we have spoken about today, the challenges that we face because of our womanhood, it is fabulous to be a woman. I have to say that over the 16 days of activism, seeing all the women come together for this cause has been so inspirational. And to use the wording from Jocelynne's seminar series, which I think is lovely because it always focuses on uplifting voices and the good of being a woman. It is brilliant and it is bold to be a woman. So thank you very much for all your contributions today. Thank you for your fantastic discussion on access to justice ahead of the CSW70, it being our priority theme, and for the engagement on the special focus area of older women, a critical issue that we also have to bear in mind in our preparation for CSW70 and beyond. Thank you everyone for joining. We will see you in the next Alliance meeting. Take care and have a lovely festive break.